Bam, what up, Yang Gang? Welcome back to the Trickle Up. And tonight we got a couple special guests in the house. To your right, my right, I guess it also looks like. We have Shy for UBI on TikTok joining us, and we have Matt here with Mute the Media on TikTok as well. So what do you got on the low for us tonight, Matt?
All right, so obviously it's been big news. Facebook's ban on Donald Trump, right? The extension of it going 6 months. And of course, there's been kind of the usual partisan talking points between the left and the right and the typical outlets. But what's not being talked about was what was really contained in that drop by the Oversight Committee. And there were some recommendations I think we should probably get into at some point tonight that kind of touched on just things that we typically kind of complain about when it comes to the lack of transparency with big tech and their moderation, their AI, the algorithms, and things of that nature. So that's not being talked about by anyone.
Yeah, so how are they challenging Facebook? Because I know it's not just about Trump. This is an overall theme they need to address. So how are they challenging everyone at Facebook to talk about all users, not just Trump? Like, what's the big difference?
So that's actually one of the big things there was Facebook kind of, I guess, when they launched this in the beginning, part of their own questions were, is there a differentiation between, public figures, politicians, just everyday users? And from what I was kind of gathering from this, they were kind of suggesting that you don't really differentiate like that. You're almost better just treating everyone the same. That way there's no kind of issue with the standards. But then part of that is you have to be clear with what the standards are and make sure everyone understands that. And so I'll read some of the specific suggestions they give, right? Because the Oversight Committee goes through their findings, right? So they lay out what they think kind of happened in terms of Donald Trump's rhetoric, right? How that impacted the insurrection. And things of that nature, but then they go through their findings and they give what they think Facebook should do, their suggestions actually for them to follow up on. And so I think there's some really good ones here. If you guys want to kind of respond, and we can jump into them real quick.
Well, here's the thing, though. What I like about this article is the first time we actually get to see behind the curtain of what is the specifics about a community strike. What did they say? That's what finally it takes a major action like this for the government to get involved to say, you just can't be willy-nilly. This is the president of the United States. You got to come with some facts, man. And so this is the first time we're really seeing them point out these specific words and phrases or why we're on January 6th specifically, we shut his ass down because he's a danger to society, yada, yada, yada. So you go ahead, Shy.
You want me to comment on the Facebook thing?
Yeah, if you have an opinion on that or whatever.
Oh yeah, no, I fully support any private business banning anyone for any reason. I think that's a slippery slope to take that away. But I especially respect a ban on a public figure that is potentially going to incite violence. And I after reading that article that Matt shared, it's not enough to just design AI that reads everyone's thing and looks at it the same. You have to have a committee that's in charge of big figures. So whether if it was Twitter, it'd be blue check marks,
right?
Or public figures, but specifically political figures, because they just have too much power if we don't keep them in check.
Well, let's look at the individual quotes too. If you want to go over those, Max, there are a couple they source. I can bring it up on screen.
Perfect, even better, because they there's about 4 quotes specifically. They probably pull out 3 specifically, especially.
Yes. So here's kind of where I stopped at. Here's the first one. So the board found that these 2 posts by Mr. Trump on January 6th severely violated Facebook's community standards and Instagram's community guidelines. And they quote him, quote, "Wow," or no, it says, "We love you. You are very special." Okay.
And who's that in reference to?
The people trying to kill Pence and whatnot. And in the first post, and great patriots in quotation marks, and then remember this day forever. In the second post, violated Facebook's rules prohibiting praise or support of people engaged in violence. So that's very specific.
And then there's follow-up. And the thing is too, this is just what they're considering within the scope of Facebook, I imagine. I don't think they're ignoring what else he's doing in other spheres. For example, when 2 days ago, he utilizes literal Nazi propaganda, right, written from Mein Kampf. He's really utilizing that towards the election. That has to be probably taken into account, I'd imagine, because if he's still repeating the same rhetoric on other platforms, he's probably going to be repeating that on your platform. And it goes back to an important distinction here is people don't understand the First Amendment only relates to government infringement on your speech. Right, but let's just say that, but it's not completely free. There's still there's still a standard in which government can come in if the speech rises above that standard, right? Where they can come in and infringe, they can censor, they can fine or jail. And that's if it incites imminent lawless action. Well, when Trump's rhetoric is inciting insurrection, that's literally the standard. So even if Facebook was a government entity, they'd be within their rights to censor the speech. So
even the government could censor that speech, right? Here's the next paragraph. They talk about the actual problems they see. They said here is at the time of Mr. Trump's post, there was a clear, immediate risk of harm, and his words of support for those involved in the riots legitimized their violent actions. And then they talk about his influence, his millions of followers on both platforms. Yeah, and it says they want to impose an indefinite suspension.
And it says it's not permissible for them to do that. So, and check it out. They don't say Trump specifically either. So this is where it relates to everybody. It is not permissible for Facebook to keep a user off the platform for an undefined period with no criteria for when or whether the account will be restored. So there has to be some kind of feedback, something you can do to get your account back, or they have to explain why you're not going to get it back or something. And it looks like that applies to anybody, right? So, and applying this penalty, Facebook did not follow a clear published procedure, right? Indefinite suspensions are not described in the company's content policies. So,
so it's a slippery slope for them just from verbiage of their agreement when you check that box.
Yeah. So this is what I'm saying. This wasn't just like Facebook, just justifying what they did. Because if you keep, we're going to keep going through this, guys, but at some point they give them suggestions as to what they think they need to do about things that Facebook's not doing well enough as it relates to all of us. So.
Well, it says Facebook's normal penalties include removing the violating content, imposing a time-bound period of suspension, or permanently disabling the page and account. The oversight board upheld Facebook's decision to suspend Mr. Trump's access to post content on Facebook and Instagram on January 7, 2021. However, as Facebook suspended Mr. Trump's accounts indefinitely, the company must reassess this penalty. Within 6 months of this decision, Facebook must re-examine the arbitrary penalty it imposed on January 7th and decide the appropriate penalty. So they're making them kind of reassess it now with a little bit of hindsight. And it says the penalty must be based on the gravity of the violation and the prospect of future harm. It must also be consistent with Facebook's rules for severe violations, which must in turn be clear, necessary, and proportionate. That's all we ask, really.
Yeah, and 100%. So that, and that goes back to ambiguity. All right, so here we go. Explain. So boom. Explain its strikes and penalties process for restricting profiles, pages, groups, and accounts in Facebook's community standards, Instagram community guidelines. That means they don't do that right now.
Right.
Next one. Include the number of profile, page, and account restrictions in its transparency reporting with information broken down by region and country, which means they don't do that right now.
Right.
Provide users with accessible information on how many violations, strikes, and penalties have been assessed against them and the consequences that will follow with future violations, which means they don't do that right now. Develop and publish a policy that governs Facebook's response to that one's it's important, but I mean, there's lots of things in there, right? That clearly signal things they're not doing that they should be doing, right? They give these suggestions, and these are things that relate to all of us, and this will go across platforms. You'll find similar issues across platforms with TikTok, with Twitter, etc. So,
well, there's also one about aiding the law. Make clear in its corporate human rights policy how it collects, preserves, and, where appropriate, shares information to assist in investigation and potential prosecution of grave violations of international crime, human rights, and humanitarian law. I think that's a big one.
And check out the one above it. These two go hand in hand. These are both huge.
Okay. Undertake a comprehensive review of Facebook's potential contribution to the narrative electoral fraud and the exacerbating tensions that accumulated in the violence of the United States on January 6th. This should be an open reflection on the design and policy choices that Facebook has made that may allow its platform to be abused. Ugh. That's a scathing review. So this is like saying, hey, guess what, guys? You screwed up big time. You contributed to this. For 4 years, you allowed this to click away and you make money, and then the last second, like,
and what did DeSantis call it? He called it an Orwellian judgment. He didn't even read it.
Of course. Oh, come on. Of course. Everything's Orwellian if it establishes some kind of repercussions or.
I can say the F word on here, right?
Oh yeah, fuck yeah.
Fuck you, DeSantis. I'm coming for your ass.
There it is. I love it. But he needs to be dethroned. He needs to be his job should no longer be secure.
Nope.
We're coming for his job, to be specific.
Politically and ideologically.
There you go. We don't want to get a strike for that one, do we? What you guys say? What do you guys say? What else you got to say with those little nuggets of information now? Shy, fuck off, boys.
You're fine. You're fine. No, I think it's ridiculous that they're like, you should do X, Y, and Z, and like it just proves that they're not doing it. And it's also kind of weird that they wouldn't want to tell people what they're not allowed to do. Like they should want to be able to tell Matt, like, you're not allowed to say this, so that if he says it once and he just gets like this guideline, he knows specifically what it was he said in his post, that he then can move forward. Like, why wouldn't, if you are trying to create a safe space, like, why wouldn't you want to specifically tell people? Like, what's their motive for being so vague? Other than then they don't have to have accountability.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. They can be arbitrary as much as they want. They're the arbiters of law enforcement of Facebook, and that's it. I think this could be huge, and hopefully will inspire the Biden administration to form a legit council to make sure this is across the board, not just Facebook, which includes all the other social medias that you agree or don't agree with. It don't matter. That's what so how can our government hold them accountable without holding themselves accountable for consistencies? So hopefully that might help. I hope, which is not likely.
I don't see it being too likely, but there's a big battle coming for sure. I mean, because either way, everyone's pissed off with big tech at this point in time.
Big tech needs to be. It's how can Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and Google, or Google is YouTube, have any kind of leg to stand on a monopoly?
Well, and what do they have a monopoly on? This is a really important thing to explore. It's not just that they're a monopoly. What have they monopolized?
All access to information.
Information climate. All right, exactly. And what's the First Amendment? What's the First Amendment about? Protecting the information climate, right? Which is why the First Amendment no longer really fully applies to the current information climate, because the information climate is no longer the public square in newspapers, right?
Well, that's the thing. When they wrote this freedom of speech thing, they're like, okay, everyone has the right to go on public land, which is the public square, which is just downtown. Public property, stand on your quote unquote literal soapbox and get a microphone. Well, they didn't have a microphone, but probably a piece of paper to go, here, you know, hear me out. But yeah, so like everyone has access to speak their mind without repercussions of the government to silence their speech or regulate it of any sort. As long as it doesn't incite violence. But now the public square doesn't exist in the same framework. It's all online. So we need to have an updated First Amendment to include internet, digital freedom of speech when it comes to like inciting violence. Like if I go on Twitter and tell someone, hey, will you murder the dude at this address? That's not protected speech. And I should be held liable for that speech.
You already are, though, in that case. If someone
in that case, that's an extreme case. That's an extreme case. But anything close to that, like,
I think the more important thing is because we should clarify. Because to your point, it's super important. Because actually, like one of the like party platforms I'm trying to create for like my own little third party bullshit thing is that we need to reconceptualize the First Amendment and the digital era, right? Because it needs to address how fast information moves now, and it needs to address the threats to information now, right? Because once upon a time, the threats to information were the church or government, right? Because they could control the narrative, right? They could control the information that came in and out. There's no more controlling that because information is so accessible now, right? And anyone can pump something into that thing, right? So what we have to do is we have to recognize that the people who've monopolized the information climate, right? Corporate media and big tech industries, right? They've monopolized this shit, and we have to break them up, and we have to recognize that corporate censorship is actually a legitimate danger. The conservatives are not wrong about that. It's just every time they scream about it, it's like the wrong application, and they don't understand the First Amendment differences. But we do have to take a look at this, look at that, because do you guys know what a Section 230 liability is?
Over the internet stuff? Yeah. So you can't sue the big tech for, like, you can't sue Facebook if I use Facebook to commit a crime, pretty much.
It's a liability shield, exactly.
Yep. We can't be sued for other people's actions on their platforms.
And so we have to look at that, because the only thing that the liability shield doesn't apply to federal crimes, sex trafficking, or copyright. or obviously like clear, like inciting imminent lawless action, right? Like Donald Trump.
Kind
right?
of like yes.
Exactly. But we have to extend that. We have to look at the fact that these guys are infringing upon people's speech in what might be the new public square, but it's a public square that they've monopolized.
Right. So here's the thing. If they've monopolized the public square, they have to be held to the same standards as the public papers that had control of the information before. Journalistic integrity and
Yes.
rules and regulations. So it needs to be regulated.
Yeah, exactly. Like everything stalled. Like when they had TV and radio, we had like the FCC, and they were all over. Like you can't do this, you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But then we made the internet, and we didn't like government didn't evolve. They just stalled. And like there should be an FCC for the internet.
Well, and so like think about it. We shut down the Department of Technology in the 90s when the internet was just really getting its feet dug in and growing roots. So that's part of the problem is there's nobody even paying attention to tech. They have no desire to regulate it because they're making so much money with it unregulated.
No, and it's not big government or unreasonable to be like, yeah, you shouldn't be allowed to just blatantly lie in a political ad just because it airs on YouTube or Facebook when you wouldn't that same ad wouldn't be able to air on television.
They should be allowed to profit from misinformation. That's the big one. They're profiting off of misinformation. And then when it's not beneficial to them and their narrative and their sponsors get nervous because their misinformation incites a fucking riot. Oh, well, we have morals all of a sudden because it affects our money. These motherfuckers have no backbone. They have nothing. They just have a filter that is meant to catch as many coins as possible.
Capitalism. This is what capitalism does to any industry.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a bare bones for-profit singular focus.
Yeah, it's a machine.
Yeah.
It's a code.
Yeah, no, this is kind of like I'm probably going to get some pushback here because it's going to make me sound greedy, but I'm just being honest. I'm like in a better society, everything that we do online should be able to be monetized because I'm creating that content when I tweet. I create that content when I write on Facebook or I put that YouTube channel up. From day one, I should be able to monetize that. And there was a time when it was a lot easier to do that on the internet, like 10, 15 years ago. And we've slowly made it harder and harder for people to creators to monetize their own personal creations. And that's messed up. Before they revamped it with you have to have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watched hours, you could be monetized on day one.
Yes.
So.
And that's when I jumped in is when they had that new rule. That's when I jumped in. And I was like, oh, I got to have 1,000 subscribers. I'm working for free until then. In other words, in perpetuity, because I didn't have a very good, most people never get there. I don't know. I wish I could do a data dive on that one. What's the percentage of channels that ever get monetized? It's not more than half, right? So it's it's more than likely you'll never get to 1,000. So it's not 50%. I would bet money on that one.
Yeah, and Matt had brought this point up the other day where it's like it's kind of weird that on TikTok you can get banned from the creator fund, but you can still publish your content that they make money from. They monetize it. Yeah, but they just take it like they still want your content.
It's not enough to have the good ideas, to your point, right? You got to be willing to fucking put the work in.
Yep. And put the resources behind it, which is time and money. Yeah, actually, we got a comment here. Massive Collective says 12% of YouTube channels get monetized. Wow, that's not a lot. So the other 78 or 88% are working for free. And the newest update to this year in 2021, they can now run ads on your content before you're monetized. It used to be you got to be monetized when they run ads. Now they run ads from your very first video. If you just trend for think about your very first video, if you get like 1,000 views in the first hour, they can decide, well, that's actually working. We're gonna get more eyes. We're gonna throw an ad in there and charge whoever that's paying for it.
Yeah,
they can do it willy-nilly whenever they want to.
Yeah, and YouTube saw what was working with TikTok, and they made the YouTube Shorts. They are exempt from your 4,000 watched hours. So even if you have a short that just blows up, which is a lot easier to do than to have a video blow up.
Yep.
It doesn't even count towards whether or not you get monetized.
But yeah, so let us know what you guys think about that in the comments section. What do you think about Facebook being put in check? What do you think about this committee actually calling them on their bullshit? And what do you think about this being across the board? How will it benefit us? How will it benefit them as a society or as a business who do you think wins in this scenario, which we know it's not Facebook. But yeah, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys next time. And like always, yang fucking gang.